All right, welcome everyone. To all the law students and neophyte lawyers out there, welcome to this masterclass explainer. Today, we are absolutely dissecting a landmark administrative case, one that strikes right at the very heart of judicial integrity. We're looking at the Supreme Court decision in Zaldy Nuez versus Elvira Cruz-Apao. Now, as future officers of the court, you know you're going to read countless cases. But I promise you, this one, it literally reads like a true crime thriller while simultaneously delivering some absolutely crucial lessons on evidence and ethics. So let's dive right into this case digest. Okay, picture this. You're a frustrated litigant. You've been fighting an illegal dismissal case for over 2 years, and honestly, you just want a speedy resolution from the Court of Appeals. So you reach out to a court employee just hoping for some procedural advice, right? Well, instead of advice, you're hit with this number, 1 million pesos. That is the massive bribe that was demanded by Elvira Cruz-Apao, an executive assistant at the Court of Appeals, all in exchange for guaranteeing a favorable decision. And the thing is, she wasn't just asking for a bribe. She was incredibly brazen about it. When the complainant, Zaldy Nuez, pleaded that he was jobless and tried to, ask for a slightly lower amount, the respondent fired back with this exact text message. She said, "Wala tayo sa palengke, hijo. We are not in a wet market, boy." She completely refused to haggle the price of justice, making it crystal clear that the price was fixed, allegedly, by the researcher who was drafting the decision. I mean, this single message instantly sets the incredibly high stakes and just the sheer audacity we're dealing with here. So to make sure you know exactly how to structure your digests for the bar exams, we're going to follow the classic roadmap today. First, we'll cover the facts. Second, the core legal issue. Third, the Supreme Court ruling. And finally, the enshrined doctrine. Let's start right off with part 1, the facts. The million peso sting operation. Let's map out the rapid res geste of this offense. The whole timeline kicks off in July 2004 when Nuez first contacts Apao. Now, completely shocked by this million peso demand, Nuez doesn't just pay up. No way. Instead, he goes straight to the investigative television show Imbestigador and the Presidential Anti-Organized Crime Task Force, or PAOCTF. Together, they hatch a plan. On September 24th, Nuez and an undercover TV researcher who's posing as his sister-in-law meet Apao at a Jollibee restaurant in Manila to confirm the deal. Apao sits there and assures them a favorable decision is going to take about a month. So they set the final handover for lunchtime on September 28th. All right, let's break down the precise mechanics of the actual entrapment, because it's pretty tense. On September 28th, the trap is set at the Jollibee at Times Plaza. You've got plainclothes PAOCF agents seated nearby, hidden cameras rolling, the whole shebang. Nuez brings an unsealed brown envelope. But, spoiler alert, it doesn't hold 1 million pesos. It holds newspaper cutouts and a few genuine 100 peso bills that have been heavily dusted with ultraviolet powder. Now, Apao is nervous. She actually suspects a trap and initially refuses to take the envelope, even suggesting they get in a taxi instead. But after an hour of tense negotiation, she finally reaches out and touches that unsealed envelope to peek inside. Boom! The agents converge, they arrest her, and the crime lab immediately finds the invisible UV powder all over her hands. Caught red-handed, quite literally. But it gets worse. Mere hours after her arrest, while sitting at police headquarters, respondent Elvira Cruz-Apao makes a phone call to her immediate superior at the Court of Appeals, Attorney Jepti. She tearfully confesses to asking for the money and getting entrapped. And when her absolutely enraged boss asks her why on earth she did it, Apao gives this spontaneous, just devastating reply. "Wala lang, ma'am, sinubukan ko lang, baka makalusud. Nothing, ma'am, I just tried to see if I could get away with it." Let that sink in for a second. Which brings us neatly to part 2, the core legal issue, specifically a question of defense. Because how do you even defend against that kind of overwhelming evidence of dishonesty and grave misconduct? Well, the absolute crux of her defense relies on a classic legal distinction you guys are definitely going to encounter in your criminal and remedial law studies: entrapment versus instigation. Now, entrapment is entirely legal. It's simply the ways and means resorted to by law enforcement to ensnare and capture a lawbreaker who already has the criminal intent. Instigation, on the other hand, is completely illegal. That happens when an instigator practically induces a would-be defendant into committing the offense. So in instigation, the criminal intent originates from the inducer, not the accused. So naturally, Apao's primary defense strategy was to yell instigation. She argued that she never intended to commit a crime at all. She claimed the offer of the 1 million pesos came entirely from Nuez, and get this, that she only met him at Jollibee to tell him in person to stop calling and texting her. She basically tried to paint herself as the innocent victim of a legal inducement by the complainant, the police, and the media. All right, moving right along to part 3, the Supreme Court ruling. Let's see how the court went about dismantling this defense. Now, this case is really great because it builds our fundamental understanding of electronic evidence. Apao actually tried to claim she didn't send those extortion texts, but the Supreme Court stepped in and admitted the SMS text messages under Section 1K of the Rules on Electronic Evidence. This section defines ephemeral electronic communication. The court clearly ruled that text messages can be proven by the testimony of a person who was a party to them. Since Nuez was the recipient, his testimony about the messages, combined with the fact that they came from Apao's admitted phone number, gave them full probative value. So, technicalities aside, those texts were undeniably hers. And I love this part because it brilliantly illustrates how the court totally dismantled Apao's claims just using basic logic and ordinary human experience. Apao claimed she didn't want the money and just wanted Nuez to stop bothering her, right? Well, the court asked, okay, if that were true, why didn't you just block his number? Why didn't you report him to the presiding justice? And most importantly, why did you meet him not once but twice and spend an entire hour bargaining over the price at a fast food joint? Because let's be real, an honest government employee does not make up elaborate stories about how much a favorable court decision costs just to get someone to stop texting them. Ultimately, the court definitively ruled this was a perfectly valid entrapment operation, and it was supported by just an absolute avalanche of indisputable evidence. You had the text messages corroborated by the testimony of the undercover TV researcher. You had the undeniable positive forensic test for ultraviolet powder on her hands from touching that envelope. And absolutely crucially, you had her spontaneous, tearful confession to her superior literally immediately after her arrest. Case closed. Finally, let's wrap up with part 4. The enshrined legal doctrine. Public office is a public trust. The Supreme Court anchored its decision directly in the explicit language of Canon I of the Code of Conduct for Court Personnel. It explicitly states, court personnel shall not solicit or accept any gift, favor, or benefit based on any explicit or implicit understanding that such shall influence their official actions. The court really stressed here that from the lowest clerk all the way up to the presiding judge, those involved in dispensing justice must conduct themselves with absolute propriety. Apao's actions created the exact kind of disillusionment the judiciary constantly fights against, the terrible impression that court decisions can simply be bought and sold. And the consequence for violating this sacred trust, it's absolute. The Supreme Court found Elvira Cruz-Apao guilty of grave misconduct. The penalty handed down was that she was dismissed from government service with prejudice to reemployment in any government branch or corporation, and she suffered the total forfeiture of all her retirement benefits. It is a severe, uncompromising penalty for sure, but it serves as a massive warning to everyone in the system. Which leaves us with this final thought for you to ponder today. The administration of justice is not a wet market. It is a profoundly sacred task. As future lawyers, you guys are eventually going to be the ones navigating this system. So, I leave you with this question. How will you fiercely safeguard the integrity of the judicial system against the temptation of the palenque? Keep that thought in the back of your mind as you continue your legal studies. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer and keep digging into those cases.